All right, guys, so the Syrian civil war is apparently back on and in full effect. So for those of you who are wondering, like, why now? How could this happen? Why now? I thought that really died down. Well, the answer is actually pretty simple. So allied with Syria, you have Iran, you have Hezbollah in Lebanon, and you have Russia. Those are their big allies. And obviously, if you take a look at the situation, they're a little busy right now. Hezbollah is literally engaged directly in a war with Israel, so their hands are tied. Iran is on the brink of war with Israel. There's already been tit-for-tat strikes, and so they're probably prepping their defenses for a larger war with Israel, if indeed it comes, especially since Trump just won the presidency in the U.S., and he's already given the green light to, bombing the nuclear facilities in Iran. And so all the allies kind of have their hands tied. Russia is in Ukraine, and that's obviously a tremendous amount of money and resources and lives being spent there. So the Syrian rebels, who've been regrouping for about 4 years now, they see an opening. They're like, okay, well, if we go take some big Syrian cities that are held by the government, who's going to come to their rescue? You know, they're depleted after the war, and of course Assad held on to power, but certain regions of Syria are already gone, and so they see an opening here. So the other day, seemingly out of nowhere, boom, the Syrian rebels start taking more cities. They ended up taking Aleppo. So let's watch this news report on it, and then we'll talk about it some more.
This is the center of Aleppo, the second largest city, which until Friday was one of the main strongholds of the Syrian army. As a symbol of its fall, the statues of the governing Assad family are taken down by the rebels amid jubilation.
This reminds me of the videos from the war in Iraq, when Iraqis were pulling down the statue of Saddam Hussein. You remember that? I'm old enough to remember that. Some of you might, I'm sure the video is up on YouTube somewhere. But this reminds me of exactly that.
Allahu Akbar!
In less than 3 days, armed opposition factions led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, marched on the city from the northern province of Idlib. Their swift takeover of such a strategic city without much of a fight by the Syrian army has left many surprised by this sudden turn of events. HTS and other groups have been fighting the government forces since 2011. What started then as a peaceful wave of demonstrations demanding more rights under the rule of President Bashar al-Assad soon turned into a civil war that led to the death of hundreds of thousands of people and the displacement of millions. And chaos ensued. For 13 years, Russia and Iran provided weapons and personnel to defend the Assad government
against ISIL targets in Syria.
The US and its Western allies launched a separate campaign against Al-Qaeda and ISIL fighters who had managed to join the conflict. Israeli missiles and fighter jets pounded targets across the country for years, and ethnic communities such as the Kurds formed their own local militias to fight the army.
Yeah, so it's actually kind of a complicated conflict because some of the initial rebels were part of what's called the Free Syrian Army, which is viewed as like the moderate rebel forces in the region, where it's not people who are like Islamist extremists who are trying to take down Assad. It's more like regular Syrians who are trying to take down Assad. But the Free Syrian Army over time sort of got less and less powerful, and there were fewer and fewer of them, because typically in a war, the moderates are not going to be the ones to hang out to really fight till the last man. It's usually the extremists who are like, yeah, let's hang in this bitch and fight till the last man. And so Al-Nusra Front became a big fighting force in this war, and Al-Nusra Front had direct ties to Al-Qaeda. Now, this new group is another a break off from Al-Qaeda, and they've tried to rebrand and say, no, we're not extremists, we're actually really moderate, bro. But of course, the ideological ties are still there. But now, on top of that, you also have the Kurds. The Kurds are, or Rojava, however you say it, they're sort of like a secular, leftist, egalitarian group that, they're in Syria proper, but they've always kind of wanted their own state, and they view Assad as very repressive. And so there's all these different factions that are going at it. In fact, I'm going to show you a map in just a second.
Syria turned into a battleground for influence with nearly 800 foreign military bases or posts scattered across its territory. For a while, the Syrian army, with the help of Iran, Russia and Hezbollah, managed to rout the opposition fighters out of most areas. But under an agreement negotiated by Russia and Turkey, most opposition fighters were forced into the northwestern province of Idlib, where they established a type of local self-rule.
Yeah, so in other words, Idlib was held by the extremist rebels, the jihadist rebels.
Why this offensive now, after years of relative calm? Some analysts believe the rebels might have sensed an opportunity in the current geopolitical situation, with most of Assad's allies mired in their own troubles. Hezbollah is still reeling under the setbacks it suffered in the face of an Israeli offensive in Lebanon. Iran might well be too busy preparing its own defenses in a potential conflict with Israel. And Russia is bogged down by the war with Ukraine. But after the easy routing of Assad's army from Aleppo this week, many of his allies may begin to question the viability of his government. Mohammed Val, Al Jazeera.
And also, I forgot to mention Turkey's role in this. So Turkey has funded and armed a bunch of the Sunni rebels. And so they're kind of playing a role in it too. Erdogan and Assad are enemies. And so this is a mess, bro. But so this was the early reporting. And the Syrian rebels did take Aleppo. But you actually did have some of Syria's allies come to their defense. Russian and Syrian jets intensified bombing of Syria's rebel-held northwest. Russian and Syrian jets struck the rebel-held city of Idlib, so that was almost like the capital of the rebels, in northern Syria on Sunday, military sources said, as President Assad vowed to crush insurgents who had swept into the city of Aleppo. Residents said one attack on the second day of raids hit a crowded residential area in the center of Idlib, the largest city in a rebel enclave near the Turkish border, where around 4 million people live in makeshift tents and dwellings. At least 7 people were killed and dozens injured, according to rescuers at the scene. The Syrian army and its ally Russia say they target the hideouts of insurgent groups and deny attacking civilians. On Saturday, Russian and Syrian jets bombed other towns in Idlib province, which had fallen completely under rebel control in the boldest rebel assault for years in a civil war where front lines had largely been frozen since 2020. So it's been a while that the lines were frozen. So now let me show you the map here, because this helps you kind of put it into perspective. Okay, so the red in this map is Syrian government forces. So in other words, this is Assad-controlled territory. This is the Syrian government proper. This is the area that they hold. They hold quite a bit. Obviously, they have Damascus, which is super important. Now, if you look at the green here, so Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, this is the group that used to be affiliated with Al-Qaeda and now broke off and now is trying to label themselves more moderate now, right? Okay, so they, this darker green is recently captured territory by that group, captured since November 27th. So they used to just have, these rebels used to just have this area by Idlib. This is the area they had. And then they've taken, as you can see here, a tremendous amount of territory, and they've taken Aleppo. So they started this offensive, and they were pretty quickly able to take a decent amount of territory, right? So this is the core of the current fighting is based off of that fact. It's based off that fact. And then you can also see here, again, to complicate it further, Turkish and Turkish-aligned Syrian rebel forces, so they're sort of allies with Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, is this sort of like turquoisey color. This is area held by Turkish rebels. Because like I said, Erdogan and Assad are enemies. And then also, as I pointed out, here's Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces. That's all this yellow territory here. Kurds have wanted like an independent Kurdistan for such a long time, and they don't have one, and they're dispersed throughout all these different countries. But, you know, they sort of govern their own territories and have their own rules, right? So this is the area that's held by the Kurds. And so I think there's some sort of a de facto agreement between all of these different rebel groups. Some of them, they're directly allies, but like the Kurds and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, they're really not at all ideological allies, but I think they might have some sort of agreement of like, look, common enemy for now. You guys go ahead and go after the Assad government, and, you know, we're with you on that front. And so I don't know, man. I don't know what's going to happen. Again, as I said, and they also have ISIS territory is in black here. So is that... See, I thought ISIS was genuinely gone now, and it was just the affiliated, like, Al-Qaeda branches that are out. Are they talking about this area and this area and this area and this area? Is that Al-Qaeda? Huh. Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. So anyway, I don't know what's going to happen. Again, there were reports that Assad was in Moscow. I don't know where he is now, but they gained quite a bit of territory, the rebels did, in a short period of time. But as I said in the previous segment, man, you got the coup attempt in South Korea, right? You have this now happening in Syria. You have the Russia-Ukraine war. You have Israel and Gaza. I mean, everything's just sort of falling apart, isn't it? Everything's just sort of falling apart. And I think the concern a lot of people have, and I think this is justified, is like, everybody, look, it's obvious Assad is a brutal dictator. If you go look at the numbers, casualties of the Syrian civil war, you go read through them. There's been so much death and destruction, and it's horrible. And the Syrian government forces have killed many civilians. I think the concern a lot of people have, though, is that we're looking again, it's like another Iraq war type scenario where it's like, yeah, everybody agrees Saddam Hussein is a brutal dictator. But then you got rid of him and everything got worse. Just objectively, empirically. Same thing with, what's-his-face in Libya, Gaddafi in Libya. You know, everybody agrees he's a psychotic, brutal dictator. He was a particularly goofy one, right? But you got rid of him, and then it got worse. You had these, like, open slave markets in Libya. It just became a failed state. Similar to Iraq, and then you had the rise of ISIS and Al-Qaeda in that particular region because you got rid of Saddam Hussein. So I think that's everybody's concern, is that, theoretically, can you get rid of these brutal governments and then something more positive comes out of it? Sure, it's possible, but recent history tells us it's very, very, very unlikely. And so, I don't know, man, the lack of stability in the world right now and the continued movement in unpredictable and unknown direction, I don't think it bodes well for the future, for anybody. And, it doesn't help that now we have Trump coming in, and he is also the chaos master. So we'll have to wait and see what happens, but everything's falling apart now. My guess is it's only going to fall apart worse and worse and worse. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.